What you guys, got another video here for you. Why are users switching from Windows to Linux in 2026? Now, Zorin OS 18 just crossed the 2 million downloads in under 3 months, and that's more than 3/4 of these downloads have come from Windows users, according to the Zorin OS website, helping it to grow the Linux user base even further. Now, this is quite a staggering number. Now, how much of this is true, I really don't know. So why are millions leaving Windows to go to Linux operating systems, according to a lot of tech outlets on the internet? If you do a simple search, you will see lots of people claiming that millions are leaving Windows to go to Linux. Now, one of these big reasons is the system requirements for Windows 11. TPM 2.0, UEFI, secure boot compatible, certain types of processors need to be used as well to be able to use Windows 11. Now, there's lots of people using Windows 11 on unsupported hardware because their computer just doesn't simply support Windows 11 and they can't officially upgrade to Windows 11 in a normal standard way. So they have to use bypass methods to be able to get to install it. Another big reason why you're seeing a lot of people maybe shifting to Linux is because the Windows 10 support has ended on October 14th, 2025. Now, they have extended this for one more year, and people are hoping that they're going to extend it further. But Microsoft have said this a 1 year only deal, and that is it. But they've said things before, and they could literally go back on their word and extend it another year and double the price. And this is the sort of tactics that Microsoft have been doing. Lots of people are unhappy with Microsoft and are unhappy with Windows in general, especially Windows 11, because it's full of bloat, telemetry, data harvesting, privacy concerns, and AI, which is another big problem for Microsoft. Now, of course, Microsoft are probably sitting back and probably not worrying at all because they do have quite a large market share of the operating systems, and it will continue to be like that because every new computer that is being sold has Windows pre-installed on that system. And of course, you can then put whatever operating system you want on it. But of course, if you are buying computers, it has Windows pre-installed, and a lot of people just generally stick with it. Also, we know there's complications with Linux, with software, different types of software that's not supported on Linux, and people just don't like change. But when you have an estimated 240 million Windows 10 PCs not being able to upgrade to Windows 11, there was a good chance that some of these people may try a new operating system because they may want to keep that old computer running. We're living in quite difficult times right now, and people just don't have the money to spend on new computers. So if we look at the stats, this is what's confusing. We're not seeing large spikes in the amount of people that are supposedly have downloaded Zorin OS and maybe installed it onto their computer. We're not seeing huge, massive spikes in the stats. And you can check loads of different stat counter sites. There's quite a few of them. This is one of them right here, and they're claiming the Linux desktop market share stands at 4.7% global as 2025, and it's up 2.76% in 2022. So it is growing, but it's not showing the huge influx of people that we would think if there was 2 million people downloading Zorin and installing it onto a computer, in my opinion. Now, I could be wrong, but there's a lot of tech channels and a lot of tech websites out there claiming there's a major shift for people switching to Linux. If we look at stat counter right here, we can see that there is a decline in Windows 11, but there's also a climb in Windows 10. Now, they claim this 3.86% of Linux users using Linux right here. But the unknown is something that I think a lot of Linux people will claim. Is Linux, but it's not all Linux, as I've mentioned before. But if we look what's interesting here, there is a major shift in people going back to Windows 10, and it's starting to climb. And it's climbing, and it could literally overtake Windows 11 again, because they're so close. And, you know, another month and you could see Windows 10 being the most used operating system more than Windows 11, which will be an absolute shocker if you're the head of Microsoft. So what do I think is happening? Well, I do believe there is people going over to Linux. There's always been people shifting to Linux. But there's a big change this time around. I think there's a lot of people that are stuck on Windows 10 and they can't upgrade to Windows 11, and they may be forced to shift over to another operating system to keep that computer going. Now, some of those people will come back to Windows and basically use unsupported hardware on Windows 10 and many different other ways of using Windows, like IoT LTSC versions and things like that. So I do believe if you are a gamer, a hardcore gamer that want to play certain types of games that Linux doesn't support, those people will probably come back, or they might dual boot. There's people that are light users, people that just surf the web, that use YouTube and do a bit of email. Those people will probably end up staying on Linux because it's super easy to install, it's super easy to set up, and for most people, they will just use their computer for light use, and it's going to work perfectly fine for those people. And there's going to be a small group of people where Linux just doesn't work for them, and they will go back to Windows, and that's perfectly fine. So why is people choosing Zorin OS? Well, Zorin OS stands out to Windows users because it's deliberately designed to feel familiar while giving you the benefits of Linux operating system. So it has a feel of Windows, but it's not Windows, it is Linux, and it's quite easy to use. And I think a lot of people are frightened of Linux, but you shouldn't be. Now, people talk about the terminal, and you really don't need to keep going into the terminal and using the terminal, but there is a few commands that you can learn, and there's plenty of literature online or videos on YouTube which you can follow, which will help you learn some of the basic commands that you might want to use or use at some point. You've got ChatGPT that you can use for command lists and cheat sheets and things like that. If you want to get into the terminal and learn a few commands, you can do. But generally, Linux will look after itself. And you just remember, you have to go into a terminal window or command prompt window or PowerShell window in Windows and do a few commands there from time to time. So it's not that different. Now, I think what Zorin OS has done with its appearance and its layout closely mimics Windows 10 and Windows 11, like the taskbar position and the start menu style and the system tray. These all are very similar to Windows 10 and Windows 11, but remember, it is Linux. And you don't have to relearn basic navigation with Zorin OS because it's very similar to Windows. So your start menu, your right-click context menus all feel quite natural because they are designed to be similar to Windows, even though it's a Linux operating system. It's very easy to use for beginners, it's beginner friendly, and that's why it's probably very popular. I've made videos installing Zorin OS, and it's very easy to set up and install. Also, Zorin OS is based on Ubuntu, so it benefits from years of stability and user-friendly improvements. And maybe Zorin OS isn't for you, and there is other ones you can use like Arch, Fedora, Mint. There's tons of them out there to choose from. Now, also another one is Windows Apps Support. It does support some Windows apps where you can install via Wine or Bottles, and this is going to allow you to use certain Windows apps inside this environment, and you can get this installed on the system and set it up and be able to use it by using Bottles or Wine. Now, some people prefer to set up a virtual machine inside Linux and install their software via Windows operating system inside there, and some people like to dual boot and boot into Windows itself and use their Windows apps that way. And if you're a gamer, some people like to dual boot Windows and Linux together on separate drives, and they can play their games on Windows and go back onto Linux as their main daily driver to have a bit more privacy. And that's another option that Linux offers. Now, because Windows and Linux are completely different, some software just won't simply work on Linux. But there's alternatives that you can use. Some software that is compatible on Windows is compatible on Linux. For instance, Audacity, VLC, programs like that are compatible on both Windows and Linux. But some software is simply not compatible, and you're going to have to find either alternatives or use wine or bottles, or you're going to have to use a virtual machine or dual boot or something like that to use that software. And that's just basically it. But alternatives like GIMP is not the same as Adobe Photoshop, but it works very similar into Adobe Photoshop. And you could use that as a workaround if you must have some sort of photo manipulation or image manipulation program to do all your photos. For video editing, you could use DaVinci Resolve. That works perfectly fine on Linux as well. And again, there is plenty of options available for you. If you have some sort of mission critical software that you must have and you must use on a daily basis, and it's just not supported on Linux at all, and there's no way to get it to work on Linux, then you're going to either need to either dual boot your system and use that on a Windows-based system and use Linux as your main daily driver and just log in to your Windows system when you need to use that software, or you can use it in a virtual box like some people do. I don't personally like that method, but some people do use that method to install Windows on a virtual machine inside Linux and have their software installed on there. But you are going to have to make some compromises because it's a completely different operating system. So that is your options, and it seems that Linux is on the rise according to these websites and Zorin OS website and a lot of other tech media outlets. A lot of them are claiming there's a lot of people shifting towards Linux. I'm sort of sitting on the fence a little bit with those statistics and the stats that I've seen online, but I hope that I'm proven wrong because I do want Linux to succeed. Believe it or not, a lot of people think I hate Linux, and I don't. I just hate trolls that will come into the comments section and troll. And there's probably one thing that Zorin OS is doing right, and that is because it minimizes the culture shock when leaving Windows to go to Linux operating system. And I think Zorin OS has tried to make that as easy as possible for a lot of people. Now, of course, you're always going to get people that try Linux and go back to Windows. That's never going to end. But there will be some people that take the leap of faith to go to Linux and stay there because it just works for them. And I can see that by some of the comments from some more civil Linux users that actually leave proper comments and saying they've made the transition over to Linux and they've been there for a few months and they're not going back. And that's great. Now, there's also Timeshift, which you can use to take snapshots of your system, which is always advisable to take snapshots of your system just in case something goes wrong, and you can revert back to it. Just like System Restore in Windows, Linux does have an option like that available. Now you can set it up just like I've just showed you right there in this video. So I'll be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments section on what you think is really happening and whether these figures are inflated or whether they are the actual true figures of people leaving Windows to go to Linux, because I'll be interested to read other people's opinions on whether they believe that millions are leaving Windows to go to Linux or whether it's just a little bit of propaganda. Who knows? But I suppose we'll find out in about another year's time, where we'll see where Linux stands with the stats and whether it's grown by quite a bit. Anyway, with that said, let me know your thoughts in the comments section. My name has been Brian from briteccomputers.co.uk. Big shout out to my YouTube members, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.